fight week. We just had our weigh-ins this morning. We are here to break it all down, talk about all the items of interest headed into this one. Now, Chuck, first of all, we got through the weigh-ins, all the important fights. Everybody made weight. We only had one weigh-in miss, and it was on the curtain jerker in the women's bantamweight division. Uh, what stood out to you most notably coming out of this weigh-in when you get to see everybody pop the top, get to see the physiques on the scales?
Some thirsty fellows up there. You know what I mean? They look a little dehydrated to me, Ben. I don't know how you saw them. Kidding, of course.
Every
Now listen, I thought that Volkanovski looks a little transformed, doesn't he? I know that this is about as shredded as I think I've ever seen him. Um, I don't know what this will translate to, but when you kind of are coming off of an extended break for him, this is a guy who fought a lot of fights in a small amount of time, especially for a champion who now gets a little over a year off, and to come back in this form, that's intriguing to me.
It is. And, you never want to read too much into what you see on the scales as long as everybody's making weight and not looking like they need help to stand upright, which we have seen before.
Oh yeah.
He's not one of those guys where the weight ever seems to be that big of an issue. Making the weight seems fairly simple and straightforward for him, but he does look good. He does look and sound refreshed, which that seems to have been one of the questions because we look back right now on his record and you see two consecutive losses. And so if you were just looking at it on paper, you'd go, I've seen this before. This is an aging former great. He's over 35 now. We've all talked about the over 35 curse for lighter weight fighters trying to win UFC title fights. He's got two back-to-back knockout losses. This is it. This is the beginning of the decline. That's what it would look like. And yet, when you add the context of those fights, where one is him going up in weight on extremely short notice against Islam Makhachev to basically save the show, and then turning right around right after that one to take on Ilya Topuria, at this point, still the world's greatest featherweight fighter, even if he doesn't want to be a featherweight anymore. And that was only a few months after that knockout loss, which a lot of us at the time said was a bad idea. We said, don't
Yes.
turn right around after a knockout, jump into a really tough fight like this with another guy who's a knockout artist. And so you look at it and you could see a decline. You could see that all the signs are there. But then he takes a year off, comes back to face Diego Lopes for a shot at a second UFC featherweight title run. And it does seem like this is where he could put all that to bed, right? He could come out here, have a great performance, beat Diego Lopes, and we could go, well, yeah, of course, Volk is still Volk.
Yeah, 100%. And if you'd said that he could take a year off at any point in time, and would he be okay with this? Because this is a guy who wanted to have something on his horizon at all times, right? Like he's kind of talked about this. But to find kind of like, I guess, a healthier way of viewing the fight game and maybe how to idle like the rest of us and just kind of not have something pressing that he's got to get to. I think that may, these are the things that you look at if you follow a fight game long enough as intangibles. Like you're like, okay, well, maybe this will be a refreshing thing. I do agree with you, man. If you're going to throw an asterisk onto somebody in a situation like this who is 36 and is coming off of back-to-back knockouts after we held him to the highest standard and had him, if not number one in the pound for pound discussion, like right up there near number one for a long time. You gotta kind of give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit. I don't think it's the classic case of, hey, watch this guy he just finally started getting knocked out. This means he's chinny, or this means we're watching the spiral. It could mean that, and I think that that's some of the kind of I guess the subtext of this whole the intrigue of this fight. Maybe this is the moment, the Volkanovski, that we really see that he is declining, or maybe those asterisks will be even bigger in the end and say like, well, he was fighting under less than ideal circumstances when he took those fights. This is the real Volkanovski.
Yeah. Those of you, if you're just joining us and you're wondering where Petesy Carroll is, where his delightful lilting Irish brogue is, we have heard reports that a months-long government investigation has kindly come to fruition. No, Petesy Carroll's out of office today. We're filling in. We're taking over. Ben Fowlkes here with Chuck Mindenhall. We are
I think
taking
we gotta
over
like
the
we
crime.
gotta just kind of like give a different excuse every time as to why PT's not here. That's the only way to roll here.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Petesy detained by border officials trying to sneak into the United States of America. Uh, the other part of this fight, the main event here, is if Diego Lopez does go out there and win, I think that we would instantly revise our opinions of him because so far it feels like he's a lovable fellow. We love
Hmm.
that he's had this Fallout Boy haircut since he was 9 years old, according to your story that you did on him a few months back. Uh, he seems like a likable guy. He has a lot of uh, really good assets, especially just like his aggression and power on the feet. It makes him an exciting fighter to watch. And yet also we have sort of looked at him as a guy who's consistently overperformed. That we saw him early on, we said, okay, this guy is fun to watch, but 2 years ago we weren't sitting around going, he will be in a featherweight title fight,
Right.
any moment now. And here he is. He's fighting Volkanovski, the Alexander Volkanovski, for the vacant UFC featherweight title. And he's an underdog here, but also not a huge underdog. Not like anybody thinks that he has zero chance to win this. And yet, when you try to map out a path to victory, if you were in Diego Lopez's corner, and you're saying, "Here's how we're going to go and get it done against Volkanovski," what would you say? What do you think his best
Wow.
shot is?
Well, first of all, you know that I went to, you were mentioning that piece. I went to a concert with him, um, Zach Bryan, which is, I would never go to a Zach Bryan concert, but this was just a weird circumstance. I was with him and his team. And I'll always, you mentioned him being likable. I just remember he has these dimples, every time he's like smiling. And we were walking in and he goes, "Oh, I forgot my cowboy hat," in English. And I was like, it was like here with a 5-year-old. It was pretty funny. I think he has that charm a little bit, like this weird boyish charm. It is really interesting, and it'd be interesting to see how far, his star power kind of increases, if he's able to go in there and win this fight. But his best approach, honestly, man, because we've seen Diego Lopez, we know that he can be a tyrant early in a fight. We've seen it a couple times. He had a few first round finishes before this last year. Um, is to go in there and put the pressure on Volkanovski, try to land something, put the heat on him early, and let him taste the power and see how he handles it. Because I think that there's a question mark within his camp as well as to like, can Volkanovski stand up to taking big shots? And I think that I would want to find that out pretty quickly. I think that, and also there's just the basic fact. You've watched Volkanovski fight a lot of times too. The more you let him hang around, let's just say that there's a couple of close rounds, the more Volkanovski is going to solve you and start to just beat you everywhere. You know what I mean? Like just all of a sudden he's adapting, he's putting together the right combinations, he's finding, exploiting little things he's seeing. We've seen him do this time and again. So I would think that if you're the Lopez camp, you're thinking, let's try to get him out of there early.
Yeah.
And if not, hurt him early. Certainly try to put him in a bad position.
I agree. I do think that you want to be aggressive early on because Volkanovski, one of his great strengths as a fighter and as a champion was that ability to adapt very quickly and learn and see what you're doing and find the weaknesses and the tendencies really early on. We saw it in those Max Holloway fights. And I think
Yeah.
that's why, he's fighting like kind of the best version of Max Holloway over and over again. And the fights got less and less competitive because the more he sees of you, the better he is at picking you apart. And that is one thing that I would be thinking about, especially if you're Diego Lopez and you are not as polished all around a fighter as Volkanovski is and as a lot of the guys Volkanovski has faced. And so you want to bring that power and speed and that kind of stuff to bear. And you want to find a way to do it though without being too overly aggressive early on and opening up counter opportunities for Volkanovski. He's too good for you to
Yeah.
just go waiting after like your Vanderlei Silva in 2002 or something. You need to go in there with a plan, but you don't want to sit around and let that guy have too many looks at you. He's kind
True.
of like an old Anderson Silva in that sense where he would spend the first 90 seconds, first couple minutes of every fight just getting reads, just seeing what you're
Yeah.
going to do, seeing how you're going to react. And then it was like he was a supercomputer that would just sort of map out a path to victory and go, all right, here we go. And Volkanovski takes a little more time, but he is always gaining information on you. And it's not like he gets tired. It's not like we've seen him get weaker in fights. He just seems to get stronger when you get into those fourth, fifth rounds with him. I wouldn't want to be there if I'm Diego Lopez.
No.
I want us to put some heat on him right away if you can.
Was it Anderson Silva you were saying took a while to compute? Was that who you were saying?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it took him the full 25 minutes to just process everything. Remember the Damian Maia fight? No, I think you're right. I think if you're Diego's camp and you're watching film, because there's plenty of it on Volkanovski, and just to how masterful he becomes through the end, almost preternaturally like starts to gain momentum, which is just it's not usual, especially in the championship rounds. I think your best thing is to avoid it. And I also think that your biggest strength, obviously, is to probably take the fight to him. They have to be strategic with this. But I can't imagine where they're like, hey, man, if we have to get into a points battle, we like our chances too. There's no way that's part of their thinking. If it is, that's a foolish way to go about it. And also, you hear this kind of like this thing in sports a lot of times when there's a big favorite. And I know that's not exactly the situation, but you can't let the other team kind of hang around because then they start to believe in themselves. If there's a doubt in Volkanovski's head that his chin is going or that he may not have it anymore, you kind of want to bring that out immediately, right? Like you want to go in there and hit him with something and be like, make him feel like he's like an existential moment where it's like, oh shit, I don't have it. Like you want to put him in that position if you can, because the more if there's any confidence issue, I don't know if there is, but there's always a little mental issue if you've been knocked out twice in a row, right? If any of that exists, it might take Volkanovski a little bit of time to just be like, you know what, man, I'm back to myself. I'm snapping back into this, So you might want to try to get to him before that.
One question I do wonder heading into this for Volkanovski is he's sitting here now, 36 years old. He's had that title run. He's kind of getting an opportunity dropped into his lap. With Ilia
Mhm.
Topuria deciding, I'm going to vacate the featherweight title, I'm going to go up to lightweight. And Volkanovski is one of the first guys you call. And coming off of back-to-back losses like that, I mean, there was still a conversation to be had about does Volkanovski's title run entitle him to an immediate rematch against Ilia Topuria. But I think a lot of us would have expected more of the same in the Ilia Topuria rematch. Here,
Mhm.
you get to come back, you get to face a young contender who's still kind of unproven, who's skill for skill you should beat. And you get to have this opportunity to go on another title run, which not a lot of people get. And yet, at his age, at the point in his career, does it seem like if he can't get it done here, if he goes out here and he loses to Diego Lopez, that's three straight, especially if he does get knocked out
Right.
again, he'll be even further from a title opportunity then. Do you think that he starts to seriously consider retirement at that point?
It's a tricky question, man, because we were already talking about how does he see himself outside of the fight game? How much of his identity? And I know you did a piece kind of talking a little bit about this type of thing, but how much of his identity is like, I'm a fighter. I need to have a fight. I need to have that kind of outlet. I'm not sure, like if how he'll handle that situation. It seems to me like he really loves the fight game. Um, I don't know. He would be so far behind the eight ball though at that point, right? Like he would then move off. Like all the things that we talk about him is always it's usually has to do with a title. He would be out of the title picture. That in itself would be really strange. Like how much does he have to prove? You know what I mean? Like and how much would you want to see him? Especially let's say he just gets smashed again, he gets knocked out in the first round. How much would you want to watch of this from a guy who's been so vital to that division for so long? There are a lot of questions, and I guess it comes down to how it happens. But I would think that it would have to cross his mind that maybe I don't want to be in here, in this type of situation, especially if he really believes like, Lopez is the step down here. This is my step down. And if I can't get through Lopez, I may not be able to beat these top 10 guys. You know what I mean? If it's a moment like that, he might want to do that. I don't know if he would.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would just keep showing up just to be fighting and collect a few more paychecks and, whatever you guys have in store for me that might be fun, I'll do it. He seems very ambitious and focused on a goal. And if the title's not there, if the title's not a realistic possibility, then what? I think, one of the things that came up when I was talking to him, he did talk about that identity piece and how having some time off gave him some time to reflect, some time to put everything in perspective. And that when he was the champ, as many champs do, as maybe you would argue that they all should, he's trying to maximize the value of that belt while he has it. That's when you're getting points in the pay-per-view. That's when you're the man. You want to be making the most money and really racking up the stuff for your legacy then. And he said basically that he was head down, totally focused on that for so long, and that it kind of took a mental toll after a while. And we've heard this from fighters before where you're so focused on doing this and you have to be so focused on it, you sacrifice a lot of the parts of yourself as a person. And you look up one day and kind of go, wait a minute, who am I without this in my
Right.
life? And eventually that point's going to come. Whether you're 40, whether you're 50, eventually you're going to have to stop fighting, and you better know who you are at that point. You better have some kind of like perspective on your life, and a lot of guys don't, and it's a challenging thing. I also wonder sometimes when I hear a guy where I'm like, I'm talking to him, I'm going, he does sound like he's in a pretty mentally healthy place. He sounds like he's
Yeah.
in, he's got it in perspective. I know some fighters where it seemed like when they got into a healthy place, the results started getting worse. And
Right.
it's weird, and maybe it says something about the way this sport is, or like the things that drive a lot of the people in it. I remember Julie Kedzie telling me once when she retired, and she said that, I felt like I worked out all the issues that I had to work out, like all the
Yes.
issues that got me into this sport. I feel like I finally worked through them, and then I was like, and now I'm ready to leave. And Volkanovski doesn't quite seem like he's there yet. He talked a lot about how he wanted to enjoy this win and enjoy becoming the champion again as a person and not just think of himself purely as Alexander Volkanovski, the fighter. But I do wonder, if you go out here and you know what everybody will say, if you get knocked out by Diego Lopes, they'll say the chin's
Right.
gone, and they'll also say the past is the past and this is the future.
I mean, you bring up so many good points. I was thinking about I did I collaborated with Ben Askren, on his biography, his autobiography, his memoir. And this was this kind of mental thing you're talking about is a big deal, and I think it affects a lot of people, especially if you've competed in just something your whole life. Even before, obviously, even before he was fighting, he was professional rugby player, Volkanovski. He was still competing. He's had something like that in his life for a long time. And I just remember Ben Askren, this was the reason he did this because he just had hip replacement surgery. So he had like a month and a half where he couldn't do anything. He was debilitated. So he's like, let's do this thing, blah, blah, blah. He was done. He'd sorted out the issues, but yet the Jake Paul thing came up very soon after this, and he
Yeah.
still had to do it. He still had to do it. I was like, what are you doing? I still have to do it. I got to take this. And I know that there's like this, it was a big payday and all that stuff, but in his mind, not even in the back mind, in the front of his mind is, I could beat this guy. If I can't beat this guy, it'll tell me for sure that I need to be away, that sort of thing. You work these things out in your mind. And I think Ben is a pretty like healthy minded guy. Like he's invested his money, all that stuff. You take examples like that and you're like, it's just a very tough adjustment, especially if there's some lingering memory of you being knocked out. And you don't want that to be the lingering memory of like all the people. Like in Ben Askren's case, there was that Masvidal knockout. In this case, if it was Diego Lopes and the other two knockouts happening in succession, you could see a scenario where he'd be like, "This isn't the way I want to go out, though," and
Yeah.
it could just be as simple as that.
Again, if you're joining us in progress, Petesy Carroll swept away by a tidal wave. Last seen being pulled out to sea, waving his arms frantically, shouting, and this is a direct quote, "Lads, help me, lads." So that's a developing story. We're
I
keeping
thought
an
he
eye
meant
on
just to
that.
do the show for him, so we're helping him the way we know how. All right.
This is all we know how to do, Petesy. This is the only way we can help you. Now, here's one thing I wondered about. We're at the press conference for UFC 340 yesterday. Everybody's doing their stuff. And Diego Lopes, who is scheduled to again fight Alexander Volkanovski for the UFC featherweight title, ends up getting into it with Yair Rodriguez. And it's heated. There he is in his cowboy hat, the one that he
Yes.
forgot for the Zach Bryan concert. By the way, I hope it goes viral. Chuck Mindenhall saying, I would never go to a Zach Bryan concert.
Oh my God.
Personally, I think he's got some jams, but that's all right.
Do you like him?
And yeah, he's got some good ones.
He's got good songs. It was good.
He and Yair Rodriguez get heated into this, which it's always a weird thing, isn't it? When it's like you want to tell the guy, hey, you're
I love
supposed to
it.
fight this other guy. He's sitting right
Right.
there. Like, let's stay focused here. And yet, Diego Lopes doesn't seem like the kind of guy who has trouble, like he can't get mad at two people at once.
Right.
I'm sure he can compartmentalize that.
Yeah.
But you're also, when I was watching it, I was just like, well, this is kind of good news for Yair Rodriguez.
It
Because
100% was.
if he goes in there,
Yeah.
if he beats Patricio Pitbull, and we've already worked some beef, we've already had taken this moment in the spotlight to shine a light on, there's an angle here between you and a guy who might become champion on Saturday, you could be sitting in a pretty good spot.
Not to mention that this is a battle of Mexico, right? Like they're basically like one guy's saying like, "Hey man, you aren't authentically Mexican. You shouldn't be repping the country," and I am, And I mean, anytime you get that kind of thing, and this is it kind of transcends the people in front of them, the guys that they have to face, and now it's become like this blood feud almost. Like it's beautiful for the game, and especially when I really think that getting Diego kind of worked up at all hasn't. I mean, he hasn't had a lot of rivalries or anything. Like it's just kind of it puts something in place. This fight came down to two. When I was with that same piece I was doing back in December, talking to Jason House and his team for Diego, and I was like, "Who's it going to be?" He said it's either going to be Yair Rodriguez in Mexico, and they knew that that would be this electric and possibly polarizing situation. Like for him to go into Mexico and fight Yair, or it was going to be Volkanovski, which they very much preferred because they knew that that probably meant for the belt. Um, Strategically, I think that there's like something in the back of his mind that's like, I already knew that we'd butt heads and we might as well do it. He's kind of, this is from Diego's perspective, and from Yair's, you couldn't be smarter, because if they both take care of their business, everybody's going to want to see that fight now. I feel like besides the Bryce Mitchell stuff, which I know we're going to be talking about, most people are kind of talking about the Yair, this Yair versus Diego thing, and it's fun how that happened. It has to be organic, and that was pretty organic, I thought.
Yeah, and it is interesting matchmaking by the UFC's part to put Yair in here to welcome Patricio Pitbull into the UFC. You see, now Patricio Pitbull, speaking of the weigh-ins today, he showed up, made the championship weight, and was just like, "Hey, in case anything should happen,
Right.
anything crazy could happen to the main event, I will be ready to step in. I will have made the championship weight." That's shrewd. That's a veteran of the game who has seen the way these things can go down. He knows crazy stuff happens in this sport all the time. Somebody could go slip on a banana peel between now and
Sure.
Saturday night. So he wants to be ready. He wants to be a guy who's kind of put his name forward. And yet, this is a tough fight for him. I think at this point in his career, it seems to me we're looking at Patricio Pitbull right now, similarly to how we looked at Michael Chandler when he came into the UFC. And the question is, did he make the move too late? Is there enough lift in there? Because, a few years ago, if he had made this move 4 or 5 years ago, we would have instantly been talking about, here he comes and he should be a contender for the title. I remember
Yeah.
doing a story, I think around 2020, 2021, where I was talking to various coaches and fighters about the way they approach film study. And I remember asking somebody, have you ever watched film on a guy who one of your fighters is going to fight? And you're looking for weaknesses, you're looking for a potential game plan, and you sit down, you watch the film, and you come away going, whew, we might be in trouble. I don't know if I see too much that is going to work to our favor.
Yeah.
And one of the coaches came back and he was like, actually, this just happened to me for the first time recently, and it was Patricio Pitbull.
Yeah.
Because we're just watching him and we're thinking, man, I don't know. Let's throw hard and hope for the best, I guess. And now you see this version of him coming, and it feels like he's still very good. He can still beat a lot of people on this roster, but it does make you wonder, does he still have his best stuff? Can he come in here and beat Yair Rodriguez?
Yeah, I do worry a little bit. What is he? 37 years old, right? I just did a piece on him as well that I think is up right now. They held it until Friday, but the piece is up right now on Patricio, and basically it's about his perseverance to be in the fight game as long as he has, and I mean to fight kind of the who's who within the Bellator organization, but also to face so many. Like, you don't get guys who could potentially be this. Could If Patricio wins this fight, he could be in line for a title fight himself, which is pretty nuts considering the amount of times he's lost in the Bellator. Like, he's had multiple times where he's almost in the Sisyphus, pushing the boulder. Like, he's had those moments, especially early in his career, where he'd get to the top, and then it would not work for him. He'd have to go back to the drawing board. He broke through. He's won a couple of titles, like different weight classes, and won back the featherweight. He's done all of this, but I think this is the one big dangling carrot for him. I do worry though, because you're like, he's 37. He hasn't. If you go back and watch the last couple of fights, you can see that he's still himself, but at the same time, he's not winning all of his fights. And so if we're talking a 50-50 proposition against really good competition like Year, I don't foresee it happening for him to where he's going to get that shot. But if he does it, it'll be a great story for him. But I think he's fighting the uphill battle now, man. Like, at 37, we're talking about with Volkanovski, and he's been through a lot of wars. This isn't exactly like the Chandler thing, where Chandler, I think, still had enough juice to kind of go in there. Even though in Chandler, it's not like he's been a world beater. He's been entertaining, right? Like, he's given all these guys
Yeah.
really good fights. He's only 2-4 since he came over, but it feels like he's better because he's given all these guys hell. I think Patricio could do that, but I don't know how long he wants to do that.
Yeah, and the wars you mentioned, that part also is worth considering because he's fought so many different people in Bellator. It feels like he lived several different lives over in Bellator, but also he's been in some tough fights, and it's not just the years, it's the miles. And that's
Hmm.
one of the things that we wondered about Michael Chandler. It's also a fair thing to wonder about Patricio Pitbull. There's a part of you that wants him to be able to come in here and give a good accounting of himself, just because if you've been following that guy's career, you know how good he has been at times and how good he was at times in Bellator. And so it would be kind of a shame to watch him come over to the UFC to finally get that opportunity after, all the contractual stuff he was dealing with, trying to get PFL and everybody to release
Yeah.
him and let him go. And then if he came over here and it just ended up being too late, it'd be kind of
Right.
a heartbreaker, when we've seen that happen. And so it's like, I guess my hope is that whatever happens in this first UFC fight, we give him at least a little bit of rope, because you know how it goes. We went through this when Pride fell apart, when the
Hmm.
UFC brought over a whole bunch of those guys at once, and we'd watch them in their first fights, and then we would make these snap judgments. And sometimes those snap judgments had something behind them. We'd see like maybe the best of Mirko Cro Cop was left behind in Tokyo. But then sometimes, we saw somebody like Shogun Hua come in, look pretty bad in his first UFC fight. Looked like he was really struggling to adjust, and then go on to become a UFC champion. And so it does happen, but also MMA fans are really prone to just whatever we saw last is pretty much the
So
book
true.
on you.
Yeah. I mean, and we've changed too, like with social media, like the days you're talking about, man. I remember the way it would sweep through. The guys would, who were fixated on, it was almost like we over mythologized them. By the time they got over to the UFC, we're like, it's almost impossible standards. I don't know if Pitbull's quite in that territory, but the people who've watched him, man, and I mean, we've been covering the sport pretty much parallel since what, 2007, 2008, like all the way
Yeah.
through this stuff. And so we've seen all of him. You've seen him, the good, the bad, everything he's able to do. When he's really good, he's really good, man. I mean, it's like it's one of those types of things. You're like, if he shows that form at all, it'd be a lot of fun, because the people who are UFC centric or just didn't know, or if they just have a UFC bias and they're like, well, I don't, these guys, they're lesser if they come from these other organizations. For his sake, I don't want his legacy, whatever that legacy is, to be tarnished by that. Where he comes over and he looks flat, and then everybody's like, "See, he sucked. He was no good." That's what we tend to do these days, right? Like
Yeah.
just the whole thing is just, what a charade. I don't want that for him.
Well, speaking of Michael Chandler, you see him here in the co-main event taking on Paddy Pimblett, and this is another one where it seems like we're still trying to decide what the book is going to be on Michael Chandler for his time in the UFC. He obviously he came in, he suffered some losses. Feels like he's lost to some absolutely great lightweights and beat the other people.
Right.
And the other people includes, some pretty good people, some guys like Dan Hooker, but also some guys at the end of the line like Tony Ferguson. But then the list of his losses, it's nothing but great UFC lightweights, every single one of them. And
Hmm.
he managed to have moments in those fights where he looked pretty good. And now you see him against Paddy Pimblett, where it feels like this is a test case for both guys in very different ways. Because for Michael Chandler, we're saying, hey, do you still only lose to the absolute best in the lightweight division? And to Paddy Pimblett, we're saying, all right, let's find out. Are you legit? Are you really going to turn into somebody in the lightweight division, or are you just going to be somebody who is popular in the
Yeah.
lightweight division? It feels like that's the precipice that we're on here.
Patty does feel like other people, the ones that you were mentioning that Chandler does beat, right? Like he kind of represents um, the guys that Chandler should beat, but this is also, I love matchmaking like this at some point, because Paddy Pimblett for the longest time has just carried some doubt about him, and I think it's almost like sometimes when guys have reputations from Cage Wars or wherever it comes from, where or he's on Ariel's show before he was ever in the UFC, he's got kind of the mop top haircut and he's doing all this stuff, and you're like, people form an opinion of him before ever watching him. So that by the time he got to the UFC, and remember, he went through some pretty heavy weather in that first fight with Luigi, what's his face, Vendramini or whatever his name was. Remember that guy, the dude he
Yeah.
fought to start? He got kind of clipped, and I think people were just ready to dance on his grave at that point. Like, oh yeah, see, and for whatever reason, that's kind of followed him, man. Through all six fights in the UFC, we saw him when he had that very controversial decision against Jared Gordon, where a lot of people thought he lost. But his last couple fights, he's looked really good. He looked really good against King Green. I think this is one of those things where he moves into this situation, and it puts if he's got haters or doubters about his potential of being a contender, we get the answers right now, because I think that's what Michael Chandler represents. He's been hovering in that top 5 space for so long that to go through a guy like Chandler, to me, would be like the definitive mark. Okay, anybody who says that Paddy doesn't belong, in the top of the picture is wrong. This guy does belong there. This would be the moment for him.
Yeah. And, Paddy's one of those guys where when you see him on weigh-in day, you go, who is this? This guy,
Yeah.
this was a person who was existing inside the person that we were used to seeing.
He just zips out of his suit, like.
Yeah. He shows up shredded, and
Yeah.
but he does it without looking like he's near death. He doesn't look super skeletal. He looks good. He looks like fit and everything, but he's also a guy who has sort of unapologetically bulked up between fights. He likes to eat, likes to enjoy himself when he's not in training camp and having to worry about making 155 pounds. And so when he shows up on the scales and you see him, you go, okay, yeah, no, this resembles the Paddy Pimblett we're used to seeing in interviews and on social media before he has a fight booked. But he is one of those guys where it seems like we've had a good time having Paddy Pimblett around. There have been those fights where we saw him and we went, ooh, I don't know, man. Like the fight that really stands out to me is that Jared Gordon one, just because you were seeing him get pasted with the same punch over and over again. And you could feel so many other lightweights in the UFC watching that fight and going, let me at him. Let me have this guy next, because they were seeing the vulnerabilities that were so evident there. And like you mentioned, even in that first fight, the Luigi Vendramini one, where he's there to be hit. There is not a ton of defense going on in the striking game for Paddy Pimblett. Now, I think he's gotten better since then, but also you put him in a fight with Michael Chandler, who that's a guy who can throw some bombs and will. And, Paddy Pimblett has a sneaky ground game, managed to get a whole lot of submissions. I was looking at our guy Drake Riggs's preview for this one, and he pointed out, though, that Michael Chandler is a guy who just doesn't really get submitted. He's been in some tough spots on the ground. He's been in some tough spots on the ground against really good fighters, and you look at him over 32 pro fights, he's been submitted once. And that's
pretty crazy.
And that's for a guy who had, 2 fights with Charles Oliveira. Now, one of those 2 submission losses was the one to Dustin Poirier, but that was another one where he had some moments in that one before he lost. But you can see him thinking, all right, I can go in here against Paddy Pimblett. I can throw hard. I don't need to worry too much about being taken down and controlled or taken down and submitted. I think my ground game is probably good enough that I can get up if I have to. Do you think that he goes out there and tries to connect with one right away, tries to put the heat on Paddy Pimblett?
I think that that's kind of just his thing now, man. I think that anything, any title aspirations, I'm not sure he's all about that anymore. Like, he's cutting wrestling promos, and he's just kind of having. I think when we were talking about just a little while back, like guys who can't stop and enjoy themselves in the midst of their career, I feel like Chandler's a little different. Like, he actually, at some point, maybe it coincides with his UFC fights, but I think he was kind of like, I just kind of want to have fun now, because he's come out of his shell from whatever he used to be. He used to be like this Bellator company man. He wouldn't give you much in the way of the interview. These days, he's just such a completely different guy. I'd be kind of shocked if he donned a singlet again, if he like did anything that was outside of the norm that we're getting used to with Michael Chandler, where he was the guy trying to slow down the offense of Paddy and trying to make it ugly. Wouldn't that be something? You'd be like, what? Because we don't expect that anymore. And I just don't think that Chandler wants to be in that business. So what it ends up being is you get a good fight. I think he's won, except for the title fight, I think he's won the end of the night bonus every single time. I think he likes that, man. I think he wants to go in there and put on a show. I don't want to say the wins and losses don't matter to him, but I don't think he fears losing. Because I think he's like, he knows his place in the company and how much time he has left. So I think he's going to go in there. He wants to, I can guarantee you he'd love to knock out, and get a TKO against Paddy Pimblett to be that guy. but he's going to accommodate him, and however that plays out will be very interesting. What I'm, you were mentioning just kind of the idea from Paddy's side of it. I'm like, Paddy could possibly, take him down a couple of times. That could happen, like where he just kind of tackles him and takes him down and just kind of roughs him up as long as he has to kind of to get through rounds. He could possibly do that. I do believe, in a weird way, his MMA wrestling is underrated. So I think that he could maybe give us that kind of fight.
Well, Patty said during the press conference that he would be talking to the referee about keeping an eye on Michael Chandler because it seems like,
Oh, right. Yeah.
he's developed this reputation, whether it's fair or not. Dustin Poirier seemed like he did a lot to advance it, where he was just like, that guy's a dirty fighter. We see what he's doing. And, there is some evidence for it. Like, there's some of those moments where you're seeing what he's doing, and it's not like he's just outright cheating. It's not like he's just going out there and kicking you in the groin and poking you in the eyes right away. It's in these moments where he feels like maybe there's a path to victory right there, and he is not going to restrict himself within the definition of the rules if he sees a finish up ahead. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what we saw against Dustin Poirier. That's what we saw in that last Charles Oliveira fight, where he had him hurt, he had his back, and he's just going to wail away on the back of the guy's head and trust that the referee is going to do no more than be like, "Hey, please stop." Which
Well,
is
that's all. That's all
that
the
is in
evidence.
fact,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
What we do in this sport is we'll watch you committing egregious fouls and be like, "Hey, this is a warning. Like, don't do it
When did you
again."
guys first roll out the Dendasso thing? Like, I feel like this has been ongoing for 15 years or something like that. It's been
Yeah, I think
forever.
it was back when Chad wrote for Cage Potato. He wrote an article, like a now kind of like famous article that laid out the logical case why you should always cheat in an MMA fight because it might give you an advantage and it so rarely results in any meaningful
That could
punishment.
be the Bible right now. I mean,
Right.
but
Yeah,
it still works. It's the same thing. Nothing has changed.
it does. And we see it all the time where it's like when there's a pause in the action because a guy got eye poked or kicked in the groin or something, the longer the pause goes on and the more restless the fans get, they blame the guy who was fouled.
I
That's
know.
the sense is they were like, "Hey, come on, hurry up, let's get this fight going again." And it's
Henry
not just the
Cejudo
fans.
recently, yeah.
Yes, yeah, Henry Cejudo is a
Yeah.
good example, and it's the referee. Everybody has a motivation and a reason to want to get the fight started again because we don't want to dwell too long on what has to happen if this thing stops. And so, yeah, like it is a good strategy, and I think the Dundasso martial art, the always cheat martial art, was based in part because Chad was basically being like, I don't have a lot of martial arts skills, so I need
Yeah.
I need to poke
Yes.
somebody in the eye to
Yeah.
give myself a chance. But Michael Chan, especially, it seems like I don't want to say unfair because he has sort of earned this reputation, but he's not the only one. There's a lot
Right.
of people who will go out there and do stuff like
Yeah,
that.
he's
John
mid
Jones will
grade.
take it. Yeah,
I know. There's guys way worse than him to point out as
yeah.
examples of this.
And
But
but there's just such a dichotomy between the Michael Chandler good guy who will see you at the top, squeaky clean image, muscle milk Mike, all that kind of stuff, but also,
adopting children, giving
yeah,
them their.
also he's gonna blow a bloody snot rocket into your
I
eye and
know.
grab the gloves and do all that other stuff. I mean, do you think that it's like at this point it's a topic going into a fight? Do you think it's unfair to him?
I mean, it's not unfair, but it's also sort of it's kind of it reminds me a little bit like Phil Jackson back in the day when he was coaching would always do this in a playoff series. He would see something he didn't like that strictly by the book was probably illegal, and he would just harp on it to the like out any media. He would just harp on it so that the referees basically everybody's now paying attention to it, and that even the referees then are like, hey, we can't ignore this because now we're being scrutinized for this very thing. In that sense, it's kind of smart by Patty to be like, can we please be on the lookout for any mistoward behavior because he's done this stuff before and he may do that again. Is it fair? I don't know. It could be somewhat gamesmanship too. Like Patty likes to play these little mental games a little bit, but you're right. There is enough evidence on Michael Chandler, and this probably goes back, man. Like this is a guy who competed collegiately in wrestling, and you learn things. You learn things about competition, the elasticity of the rules, and how they're going to be enforced through competition of years and years. You would almost blame him more or look down on him more if he didn't exploit a few of the things that he could get by with, right? At this
Yeah.
point,
Yeah. Um, Again, those of you just joining us wondering where Petesy Carroll is, I have it on good authority. He is out today because he's auditioning for the Real World Ireland.
Yeah.
His quote that he sent me in a text says, "I need this. I can't tell you how much I need this." So we wish him the best of luck there, and hopefully he'll be back next week.
I like
Speaking
that you
of
roll out the
narrative,
real world. Like, how is that even still a thing? Like,
I
how?
assume, I think Petesy's trying to get on the Real World just because he wants to get on the Real World Road
Yeah.
Rules Challenge.
Okay.
That's it's
The
it's a
rules. Okay.
he's taking it one step at a time. Uh,
Uh,
when you speak of narratives heading into a fight, you can't not talk about what's going on with Bryce Mitchell and John Silva. And this,
you love this shit.
I love it. I love it because it highlights what a weird sport this really is. And I wrote a column about it today where it's like, imagine you're trying to talk to somebody who doesn't really follow this sport. Imagine you're at a watch party. You're showing up, you got friends coming over for UFC 314. You're going over to somebody's house to watch it. Somebody's there, somebody's boyfriend or girlfriend. They don't really follow the sport. They're like, okay, what's the story with this one? And you're like, oh, yeah, no, people are really looking forward to this one because one of these guys came out again on episode 1 of his podcast and said that based on his own research, Hitler was a good guy and he
Yeah.
would have liked to go fishing with him. And that did not go over well. He finally found the line where MMA fans will get mad at you. And
Some of them.
yeah,
There
some
you
of
still
them.
had some that were with him. It's crazy.
And then we had this guy, a streaking contender, kind of coming up the ranks, said, "Hey, give me this guy, I'll fight him." And so we booked this fight, and they've been going back and forth at each other. And yeah, one of them, sure, he thinks that ever since he took this fight, he's been plagued by demons torturing him in his sleep. And then when it's not demons, it is sexy ladies trying to
Right.
tempt him to cheat on his wife.
Sometimes it's
He's,
hard to tell the difference. Ben. Like when you
don't I know it, brother? The the thing is, he seems to genuinely believe all of this. And John Silva comes in and he seems like he's having a laugh with it a little. He seems like he's using it as a means to an end, right? Where he's just like, Bryce Mitchell has brought this kind of attention on himself. I can get attention for myself by beating him up, especially in this moment where there are a lot of people, perhaps UFC executives included, who would like to see him beat up. And it was just that immediately turned into the sales pitch when Dana White had to respond to Bryce Mitchell's comments. And he was just like, no, we're not actually going to do anything to him. I think that he is one of the stupidest human beings, is what Dana White said.
it's a badge of honor.
And he was like, but hey, if you don't like him, you don't like what he said, this is the great thing about this sport. Now you get to tune in and maybe watch him get beat up on TV. And it's working as
Yeah.
a sales pitch, as a narrative. Tell me it's not working. Tell me you're not more excited for this
Yeah.
than you would be for any other fight where it's like number 13 guy in the division against an unranked guy in the division.
This was the Vince McMahon moment, wasn't it? Like kind of like, what you want to see him get beat? Here it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's so much to it, man. I love it too because at its root, it's almost like he's being kind of a dick to me, and I'm more religious than him, and I'm more of a godly man than him. And it actually, like in talking to Jean Silva a little bit too, like this is making him mad that he's being cast as a bad person. Like this doesn't sit well with him. I know that him and Mauricio Hoofy, whatever he's going by. I think it actually is Hoofy. He's a very religious guy, and so and I know Jean, like is kind of part of that in terms of being with him in that, like, kind of, you know what I mean? Like he's getting more into being a religious guy, if that makes any sense. So I think this all rubs him wrong. So, but you've got all this backstory, and it's crazy with Bryce Mitchell because he could, like, you see his eyes, they're just so like lucidly crazy, like when he's staring at him and stuff. And you think of almost like Children of the Corn or something like that. One of these fanatics who, like, it's just beaming through them. Their fanaticism is beaming through them, and you're like, man, this is crazy. It's such a perfect thing for the fight game. I really can't think of another example of a guy like that, or even somebody from Arkansas. There aren't too many Arkansas fighters, like, if I'm being honest, but like a guy like that who's just like, I know you think I'm stupid, and then he'll say something even more ridiculous the next sentence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the setup for this is brilliant. And then you have the other guy barking at him and acting like he could possibly be possessed by the devil. I mean, like these elements all play together really nicely.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that Jean Silva seems like he's doing it for the bit. he sees an opportunity and he's like, okay, I'm going to lean in a little bit. Bryce Mitchell seems to genuinely believe everything that he is saying and always has. And it's weird because it's like he came out there, he seemed a little bit taken aback when he first made his appearance after this to hype up this fight after they first booked it, and he was getting booed every time he talked. And his response to that was to then quote the Bible where
Hmm.
Jesus was talking about how he also had been hated. And it's like, bro, are you really going to turn around from the Hitler apologia to kind of putting yourself next to Jesus Christ? Like, that's
Right.
not a great move, but that is exactly how he went with it. And then, you see them in this matchup where it does seem like the promise is, hey, one super controversial guy, but the UFC sees controversy as opportunity. You never want to let heat go to waste, just like a good pro wrestling promoter. So if people
True.
feel some way about this guy, whether it's positive or negative, then we want to turn that feeling into interest and cash. And so one way to do it is to book him against Jean Silva, who seems like a guy rocketing his way up, who could really be he could wake up Sunday morning in the top 15 if he goes out there and has a good performance and beats Bryce Mitchell, especially finishes Bryce Mitchell. He seems like he knows that. He's really leaning in to all of that, whereas Bryce Mitchell seems like maybe this is he might genuinely believe he's in a fight against the forces of darkness. And that, like, there's just such a difference, it seems, in
I
like
know.
how they view the fight. But it is like, you do hear people talking about it. Like, people are interested in this fight, and you gotta say that's part of
Yeah,
it.
100%. And John Silva too, like in talking to him about a week ago, he was embracing, I don't know he's almost embracing something I was asking him like, so this Lord thing that you have, and he was sitting around his team, and the team was like, well, you don't really want to talk too much to Jean as he gets closer to the fight because he starts to change into this like very grumpy and very like focused, almost animalistic like thing where he becomes, and they're like, watch fight week, you'll see what we're talking about. And sure enough, as we've gone on, he's barking, he's doing all this stuff. Now, how much of that is really the case, and how much of it is like this strange dark thing that he wants to kind of harness and bring into in a strange way, there's some truth and merit to what Bryce Mitchell is saying. Like the guy actually, I think, does try to bring up like whatever is in him, dredge up like his animal spirit or something to come into this fight. I love that sort of thing, right? Like it's just, I think that Silva himself looks at it like he's doing a public service for
Yes.
the. So he's like he really wants to tap into it, and when I was talking to him, he's mentioning like giving brain damage and all this stuff. There was a lot of that kind of talk. Like it was a lot of what we'd consider, sometimes you're like, I just want to beat the guy. This wasn't like that. He wants to retire him. He wants to plant him into the earth. It's like one of
Yeah.
those things. He wants to really beat him up.
Meanwhile, I saw Bryce Mitchell on one of these pre-show things with talking to Laura Sanko with the UFC, and she was basically being like, "People don't seem to like you now. How do you feel about that?" And he was like, "I think people will forget about this, and they'll realize that I'm a likable guy." And then the next thing I saw of him was one of these videos where people were asking, "Hey, what would your alternative nickname be?" And he said, "White Power, I believe." And I was just like, "Man, there's not gonna be a time post saying
No,
dumb things
no.
for you. Every
Oh
time
my
you open your
God.
mouth, there's a new one, it seems." He said the thing after Jean Silva was barking, he said the thing about how he put down dogs before, and you're just like, I don't know, man. That doesn't seem great either. Like, what? You keep acting like hey, I said one dumb thing. There'll be a period after, like a refractory period, where then my image will recover, and it's not happening because he's just saying more stuff. And yet it does translate to this sort of like an interest in this fight that otherwise absolutely would not be there. This is a fight, if you just heard about it, like, hey, number
Yeah,
13 in the division versus unranked in the division, that's a UFC fight night bout,
yeah.
and yet
I know.
here it's one of the marquee attractions.
Well, it's because if John Silva wins, obviously you still got like the fighting nerds are just like on fire, right? Like this whole
Yeah.
team is just continues to roll. But if Bryce wins, it's almost like now what? You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yes.
Because now you're gonna have to deal with one of the most existential, strange. Like I was like putting myself into the spot and kind of like sweating. It was when he went on Ariel's show, and remember he wanted to talk to him about guns and all that stuff, and he just wanted to ask him, he wanted to turn it around. and put it all on Ariel to answer all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is the kind of guy that you just don't know how to handle. And I think that it just kind of times 10, right? It's going to be times 10 if he's able to win this fight. I don't know where this all goes. But there's a fascination in that too, because where else can it go? You've already kind of said the stuff that's about as controversial as you can get. I don't know where it goes, but I think that element only would expand. Like whoever fights him next, it would be another big deal, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I do also, before we move on to other topics, outside of UFC 314, want to point out one of the fights I'm most looking forward to, which is Jim Miller versus
Yeah.
Chase Hooper, where it looks like the dad on the block takes a moment from turns off the lawnmower, walks across the street to take on some uppity kid
Yeah.
who's been causing trouble in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Stylistically, two grapplers visually, where you see Jim Miller with a little bit of gray in his beard and Chase Hooper, who still somehow looks like he's 16. I love everything about it. I was once on a flight with Chase Hooper where I think it was post fight sometime, and he had some bruises on his face. And for one thing, the UFC is going to throw a dude and coach on the way back
Oh yeah.
from from a
Big
fight.
time.
And he was like across the aisle from me, and I could hear him. You get on a flight looking like a teenager with a bunch of bruises on your face. Your seatmates might have some questions about it, and they did. And I could overhear him trying to explain that he was a UFC fighter, and you could just imagine the person being like, "No,
Yeah,
you're
sure.
not." There's
Oh,
absolutely,
cute.
there's
Russell said.
absolutely no way. You got beat up in junior high. There's no way that you're a
Him
professional.
especially with that baby face.
Oh yeah,
Dude, when Jim Miller debuted in 2005, Chase Hooper was 6 years old. That's just the weirdest. Like you think about that, you're like, that's a crazy kind of thing. But the Jim Miller aspect of it, making his 46th walk, the fact that he's still doing this, man, owns records that I think will never be broken in the UFC because I don't know if you'll get that kind of longevity. I don't even know if you'd get that kind of shake anymore. There's too many obstacles for you to hang around through eras like that. And also just battling through like Lyme disease and
yeah,
things like that through his career. Um, he's one of the most unsung UFC fighters. You know what I mean? Like that
yeah.
there is, and it's a marvel every time I see him, man. So I'm with you on that. And obviously, Darren Elkins is on this fight card too, who's in a similar way. He's like 40 years old now. It's funny because I have a story where he was on a fight all beat up. It was after Vancouver. His face was just a mess, and I remember people coming up to him, flying coach. I remember the exact same scenarios that you're talking about. But the fact that I think, 12, 13 years later, that he's still doing it is a marvel. And sometimes you got to look at these old guys and their perseverance and be like, man, good on you. I wish they were a little more celebrated than they are.
Yeah. Well, especially for a guy like Darren Elkins, he's the dude who could show up on a flight, his face is all messed up, and he won.
I
He
know.
is that's he could be the winner of the fight and look like he was
So true.
absolutely put through a meat
Yeah.
grinder. So I appreciate that. We would be remiss if we did not at some point in this show talk about everything going on over there with the GFL.
Yeah.
Because the breaking news this week, our own Ariel Helwani of Uncrowned broke that the GFL is canceling its planned first events in California. Even got some quotes there that basically were blaming it on the investors who didn't come through. Some checks didn't cash, apparently. And now the future of the GFL is uncertain. They're insisting that it will go on, that these events will actually happen. You had a great column on this where you talked about how, yeah, this is not exactly a surprise. We've kind of seen this movie before, and we should have seen where this one was headed. What were your first thoughts when you heard like, okay, GFL, the first events are off, and all this, there'd been so much build up to this. We did a draft, we had the
I
AI
know.
video, we had a rap song, we had all this kind of stuff. You had all these fighters, like veteran fighters signing on. You had some people trying to get out of existing contracts so they could go over and sign with the
So crazy.
GFL, which now may never have a single event.
I think it was just that in the fight game specifically, like you've seen it, man. It's like if there's something that's crazy ambitious, you always have to think, does it ever even happen? Even if you
Yeah.
have like fighters fooled or whatever it's going to be, and who knows? Maybe they still are able to pull off at least an event at some point. But you see this happen, man, and as soon as you knew that roster, kind of all the people and the kind of ambitious idea and kind of the ideas within those ideas, like basically a league oriented thing. I know that you worked with the IFL. We've already seen elements of what they're trying to do, and you're just like, so it's not just one red flag, it's like this whole colony of red flags all over the place, and you're like, I don't see how this happens unless they just have an endless financial partner who's like, all right, let's try it, man. We can take hits for as long as we need to, until we start seeing money. And that seemed unlikely. So when it came through that the investor, and who knows what the situation is, but that their investor didn't come through for April, whether that's cold feet or something else, who knows? But it wasn't surprising. It's just one of those things. I opened that column by basically saying that one of the more popular talking points was, what are the odds that they ever have an event, even
Yeah.
though they went through the draft and all this? And most people, it seemed like when I have these conversations, were like, they would guess no, they wouldn't. And so in that sense, I guess the sense of foreboding and all that was already in place. The fact that it might not, happen. And so when you get this news and you're like, it's unfortunate because we cover these people, all these people, we've covered them, all these guys who've ended up, in this league, or, hoping to kind of brush off themselves whatever years of retirement and jump into this league, make some extra money. And the purses were supposed to be pretty high. We care about these people, man, and you kind of want you want the best for them. So like, as they go through this and they go through, if this doesn't happen and they're just kind of screwed in this whole process, you're like, man, did they really need to have to go through that? All the
Yeah.
people involved. That's what kind of sucks about it. So there was a part of me rooting, not just because MMA always needs more, like it can't just be the UFC dictating the space. You always want to have more promotions out there that people can, and more alternatives. But I really wanted to see, at least, I was rooting for it to at least have an event. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure that happens.
Yeah, the statement that they posted to X here from the GFL account says, unfortunately, we've been forced to postpone our May launch event. Our primary investor was unable to meet their funding commitment. We are working tirelessly to secure the necessary funding to support a successful launch. Although we anticipate this delay to be short-lived, any athlete may request an immediate release. We are committed to our mission and will continue to fight forward together. The support from our athletes, coaches, and managers during this time has been truly inspiring. That's from Darren Owen, the founder and commissioner. It's interesting, isn't it, when you see what the word postpone has meant to various
Oh,
fight
yeah.
promoters over the time. We've even seen the UFC do it, where we're just like, hey, we're not canceling this event. We are postponing this event. And then
Right.
month or two goes by and we go, hey, by the way, when is that postponed event going to take place? And the answer is never. Like,
Right.
we're not doing it.
Yeah, go
And
go look up UFC 151. You won't find it.
yeah, yeah, and there was a couple of those, right? And it was
Yes.
just like, and finally, I remember somebody going back to Lorenzo Fertitta for one of them, and they were like, "What about the postponement on this one?" He was like, "It'll go down in the history books as the one that didn't happen. We just
Yeah.
sort of skipped over it, and we go right to 152, that kind of thing."
Exactly.
And here it seems like we have another one. It is a bummer though, especially because it's like those fighters seemed to a lot of them get really excited about it.
Hmm.
It was a big opportunity for a lot of those guys. They were talking about big money that they were expecting. A lot of those guys were looking at it like this might be the last fight related paycheck I
Right.
cash, and it could be a good one. And some of them turning down other opportunities to come over here and do this. And now, if it ends up being nothing at all, that's a bummer, man. Like that has real consequences for real people's careers and not just oh, we were trying to do a thing, it didn't work out. LMAO,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
these guys kind of needed this to happen.
It's just that big kind of like puffing up the chest. You know what I mean? Saying like, check it out. This is what we're gonna do. How has this ever worked? I feel like even like I was thinking about the Triller event where they had all these musical acts spliced
Yeah.
through, and then you're like, dude, you've spent an extraordinary amount of money on this. And as far as I know, man, there are still people waiting to be paid from that. So it's kind of, anytime you hear that something's coming through that's going to require a lot of money. And I don't remember, I know Shanish Shadi had put together like how many different former UFC fighters, how many Bellator champions, all the people that were involved in this. That's not cheap. Um, and you would like to, if they're going to go to the lengths of having a draft, of trying to secure whatever broadcasting, but all this stuff, and going on shows and basically saying like, we're going to do this, you'd like to think that they had the money secure enough to give that the real shake to actually do it, like to go out there and put on their initial shows, at least to let the action itself and the night itself kind of dictate what happens next. I never like to hear that, our finance partner didn't come through, because that's the fight game. I feel like we've heard some version of that the whole way through. This goes all the way back. You're a big history guy with for the boxing. You can find that kind of story
Yeah.
going back to the early 1900s, man.
Yeah, and it is because, like you said, if you're gonna try to make a big splash out of the gate, that's gonna be your thing that we're gonna burst onto the scene as a major organization right away. Then you need to have a lot of money that you don't mind losing
Right.
for a while because you need to have a pretty good runway in order to have a chance of taking off. And the other way to do it is to be an organization kind of like Strikeforce did, where you start out as a strong regional organization, you build a fan base up in an area, you have fighters from that area, you can sell tickets there, and then you gradually become something bigger. You gradually get TV deals and start to grow. Not many people want to do that. Like
Yeah.
that they want to just hit home runs right
Right.
out of the gate.
Fly
They
into
don't
flight.
want to
Yeah.
build. And I don't know if you can do it. And if you are going to do it, you got to find some people you can sell on it right away and be like, "Hey, give us millions and millions of dollars," and wait 5 years before you ask if then he's coming back.
I would just like it to be a more like enticing pitch, though, because give me an IFL team. What was one of the teams from back in the day?
The Los Angeles Anacondas.
So
Boss Rutan was the
did
coach for a little
okay, so
while.
and they had like were you at like the events, right? Like was there like this huge LA contingent that was like, dude, that's our guys right there, and they were like, 18,000 strong, kind of rocking a building and just home court advantage.
The only
There's no
ones who
such
got
thing
that,
as
there was one team that got that,
okay.
and it was Pat Militich's team, the
That makes
Quad
sense.
Cities
That
Silverbacks.
makes sense given the
Just
area.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, and like by that time, they already were
They're
a
all cousins
known.
out there. They all know each other.
It's like they people from that area and like Bettendorf, Iowa, they
Yeah.
already knew about the Militich camp, took a lot of pride in how much success that they had had in MMA, in the UFC, and in other organizations. And so it was just like you're kind of just given a new name to a thing that already exists. Plus, they were one of the few teams where they actually lived and trained there.
Right.
Like those guys
Yes.
actually were Quad Cities guys, where it was just like we had the Tokyo Sabers, and it was like Antonio McKee and a bunch of people who lived and trained in LA, you know?
Yeah. I mean, when was it Tyron Woodley was drafted to Team Dubai, I was like, I don't know if he's gonna uproot and go. But my point is that this concept of like representing a city, I just don't. It's not. This is a sport that has proudly like existed as a mono. Like you talk to guys and you're like, why did you choose fighting? And a lot of them,
Mhm.
they give you a lot of different reasons. But one consistent thing is like, I couldn't with ball sports where a ball is a metaphor for what we're doing, and I can't literally dictate my will into the situation. I don't want any part of it. It has to be where I'm totally accountable for winning and losing. Like I'm the only guy to blame. I'm the get rid of the team. This team concept thing is just I just don't see the fit. I don't really even when you get into tournaments, it's a sticky, situation. I know that sometimes they can be fun, but that's the one thing I'm like these new places that are coming, like even the PFL. I'm always like, guys, I just don't think the psychological lure, the hook, is what you think it is. I just don't
Yeah.
think fight fans care about that stuff.
Well, we still have one fight event that we actually have reason to believe will happen as scheduled, and it's Saturday night UFC 314 down there in Miami. Chuck, give me one thing you're really looking forward to out of this one, whether it's a fight, whether it's one of these questions answered. What's the big one for you?
Let's see. You know what, man? Like, I'll just mention something that like we haven't really talked about this. The Krylov Dominic Reyes fight, like
Mm,
that's a really interesting fight in a strange way because we buried Dominic Reyes a long time ago. Like this is
yep.
a guy who had a legit claim that he beat John Jones, starts getting knocked out, and I mean in the worst possible ways, where you're just like, this guy needs to get out of the fight game. Now he's won a couple of fights. He's on the verge of putting himself back into kind of like into the picture, into the mix, I guess, of what, at the top of 280, 205. That to me is crazy. Like this is like one of those things. It's crazier to me in this situation because the way he was knocked out in a couple of those fights than even the Arlovsky ones back in the day when he would resurrect, he'd lose four in a row, and then all of a sudden he was back into being a contender. That's remarkable in itself. And this is one of those fights that nobody's talking about, man. And Krylov is one of those guys that I feel like he's 50 years old, but the dude's like 33 and he continues to win all these fights and has overcome a lot of stuff. It's an unsung fight, man, but I kind of dig it in that sense because both guys have like strange stakes attached to this.
Yeah. For me, I got to say, is Jim Miller and Chase Hooper, that one, especially when I looked at it and I saw Jim Miller is like a plus 600 underdog in
Wow.
this one. Jim Miller by submission.
There's that
which is
20
always-
bucks that you don't want to see again.
if you had it laying around, Jim Miller by submission is like plus 1300. And I just
Wow.
be like, I get it. I get what people are looking at and how they come to that conclusion. But also, haven't you learned anything from watching Jim Miller over the years? How many of these, well, Jim Miller must be done, he's too old kind of fights has he been in? And he'll find a way to win those. Like the UFC has put him in fights before where it seemed like we're trying to boost up the next guy and we're going to do it on the back of Jim Miller. And he can come out there and he can ruin those plans for you. Jim Miller's a salty old dog in this sport, a savvy veteran, the veteran's veteran, a beloved fighter. And, you know, there's a part of me, just as a gentleman of a certain age myself, who would like to see him, you know, push the youngster back down the ranks and be like, not yet, kid. So that's it for me. This has been a fun and unusual episode of The Craic. If you've been wondering where Petesy Carroll is, we have it on good authority that he saw an ice cream truck on his way to work today and is still chasing it. We hope he catches it. He wants that Mickey Mouse ice cream bar. We do have one super chat, though, Chuck. Are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I love the little graphic. This is good.
Okay. I see what's happening here. This one from a guy, I believe it's pronounced Petesy Carroll.
Okay.
He says, great job, lads. You didn't swear enough for my liking, but I think it's still been a fantastic episode. Green heart emoji. First of all, to that criticism, I will say bullshit.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of bullshit.
I like the enunciation, but no, I don't cuss generally.
Yeah, you like to keep it clean like Will Smith and his raps.
Yeah. But I will say that Petesy does add an element of the rebald, you know. There's something about it.
We miss his energy, his enthusiasm, you know, his particular methods of chopping it up. There's only one Petesy Carroll in this industry. Everybody knows that.
We've got to get on the same hymn sheet, fella.
This is what I love. If not for communicating with Petesy, there would be so many just like Irish idioms and expressions that I would never have any knowledge of. It's kind of like whenever I hear a Brazilian fighter say, "In my country, we have a saying," and I'm focused, I'm dialed in. Then I gotta hear it. Petesy has many of those same sayings, and I, for one, really appreciate it. Well, thanks for joining us on The Craic, everybody. Chuck, any last words? Anything that you want to leave us with here? A song, a poem?
Look for that big GFL event that's going to be happening in June, Ben. It's going to be big.
Gonna relocate, set our sights on London, and the world will never be the same. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to the crackheads. Thanks to everybody who joined us and wondered the entire time if Petesy Carroll had in fact been killed in a tragic accident. We assure you he is safe and sound. He'll be back next week, and you know, hopefully we'll get a chance to join him. Hopefully we didn't get ourselves banned from the show for life today.
We'll see.
Thanks, everybody.